I knew something shady was going to happen the moment Lenora Featherstone got elected HOA president. She showed up at the first meeting in a pastel blazer, sunglasses on indoors, and a clipboard like it was a weapon. Her voice had that sharp edge, the kind that made you feel like you were being scolded by a kindergarten teacher, even when she was just asking. "Quintin," she said, dragging my name out like it was sticky gum on her tongue, "your Hayfield is becoming an eyesore. It's not appropriate for the aesthetics of Cedar Ridge." I leaned back in my seat and gave her a long look. "It's a hayfield, Lenora. It's supposed to grow. That's how hay works." Her lips twitched, but she didn't say anything else, not then. I figured that was the end of it. I was wrong. A week later, I went out to bale the field. Tractor purring, I was halfway done when I saw her white Lexus, parked smack in the middle of the lower acre like it belonged there. No note, no explanation. Just sitting in the middle of my property, like a crown jewel. I killed the engine and stared at it for a minute, trying to process the absurdity. Then I saw the little sign she'd propped up in the windshield. "Community Enhancement Project Zone HOA, authorized." I laughed. Out loud. Alone. I didn't call her. I didn't knock on her door. I bailed around that Lexus like it was a rock in a stream. Clean, tight circles. Left her a nice, hay-walled fortress. Then I went back to the house, cracked a beer, and waited. By sunset, she was at my door. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked, motioning wildly toward the field like I'd summoned a crop circle around her car. "You parked on my land," I said. "I figured you wanted to be part of the harvest." "This is HOA property now," she snapped. "We voted last night to temporarily annex the lower field for beautification. You should read your emails." I raised an eyebrow. "Lenora, I didn't sign over my land to the HOA. You can't just vote to take it." She turned a shade of red I hadn't seen since high school football. "You'll be fined for obstruction," she hissed. "And if that hay damages my car, you'll be liable." I stepped outside, arms crossed. "You better call a tow truck, Lenora. That car's not going anywhere until harvest is done." "Mark my words, Quintin Dorsey," she said, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You've just declared war on Cedar Ridge." She stormed off, stilettos sinking into the hay as she went. I watched her leave, then strolled back toward the barn, already thinking about what kind of traps she'd try next and how I'd be ready for every single one of them. 2 days after Lenora's tantrum in my driveway, I got a yellow envelope shoved through my mail slot. No postage. No return address. Just typed in bold across the top, "Cedar Ridge HOA Notice of Violation." Inside was a single sheet accusing me of unauthorized agricultural activity within shared community borders and threatening a fine of up to $250 per day. I stood there in the kitchen holding it, steam rising off my coffee, wondering what kind of lunacy made someone believe they could fine a man for using his own land the way it had been used for 3 generations before him. I didn't bother calling the HOA. I called my cousin Jolene. She was a real estate attorney who'd spent the last 5 years tearing apart shady development contracts for fun. I faxed her the violation and waited. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. "They're bluffing," she said. "Your property deed predates the HOA charter by 6 years. They can't regulate it, annex it, or impose any kind of fine on it unless you explicitly allowed it in writing, which I know you didn't." I figured as much. "And Quintin," she added, voice sharp now, "if they keep this up, don't just ignore them. Document everything. Every letter, every incident. If they're forging votes or altering maps, that's fraud." I spent the next few days installing a set of motion-triggered trail cameras around the property. Not just the field, the entire perimeter. I didn't announce it. I didn't post signs. I just waited. Sure enough, it wasn't long before I caught 2 men in reflective vests walking the edge of the property line, measuring tape in hand, mumbling to each other about adjusted boundaries. One of them pulled out a spray can and marked a spot near the tree line. I downloaded the footage, backed it up, and emailed it to Jolene. That same afternoon, one of the neighbors, Marty, from 2 houses down, showed up with a nervous look and a 6-pack of domestic beer. I didn't know where else to go, he said, eyes darting toward the street. Lenora's been having private HOA meetings. No minutes.
No notices.
Just a few of the board members at her place late at night. I overheard them saying something about a greenway easement. I motioned for him to sit on the porch. She wants to rezone your back acre, he said. Claim it's for community use. A walking trail or something. But the thing is, she's already submitted a proposal to the city. I stared at him. She filed paperwork.
Yeah.
My wife works in permitting. She saw it flagged for review. The proposal includes your land and 2 others along the ridge. She even submitted fake signatures from you and the Thompsons. I stood up so fast the chair scraped the porch wood. She forged my name? Marty nodded. And probably theirs. I didn't want to get involved, but well, this is getting out of hand. It took less than an hour for Jolene to confirm it. Lenora had submitted a neighborhood improvement plan to the city zoning board, backed by what she claimed was a unanimous vote by all affected residents. Included were 3 forged signatures, a doctored map, and a fake HOA resolution code that didn't exist in any official Cedar Ridge documents. We filed a formal fraud complaint the next morning. But Lenora wasn't done. The day after the complaint was filed, I came home to a bright orange sticker slapped across my front door. Condemned unsafe structure, HOA code E47. I stood there staring at it, my jaw hanging open. The house was in perfect shape. Roof redone last year. Plumbing updated. Not a single code violation on record. Then I saw them, 3 HOA board members walking down the street in matching polos, clipboards in hand, knocking on doors and handing out flyers. I followed at a distance, just far enough not to be seen. When one of them handed a flyer to a neighbor, I caught a glimpse of the headline, Community Safety Alert, Dangerous Activity at 1147 Hollow Pine Drive, my address. I walked up to the porch before they could leave. What exactly is dangerous about my property? I said, folding my arms. One of them, a wiry guy with thinning hair and too much cologne, cleared his throat. There have been several reports of illegal farming and unregistered equipment in use, he said, not meeting my eyes. It's a safety concern. You mean the tractor I've had for 15 years? The one that's registered with the county. He shifted. We're just following up on complaints. From who? Confidential sources. I turned to the neighbor, whose porch we were standing on. Do you feel unsafe because I cut hay on my own land? She looked uncomfortable. Honestly, Quintin, this whole thing seems blown out of proportion. That night, I wrote a formal complaint to the county commissioner's office. I attached the video footage from the trail cams, the fake condemnation notice, the forged zoning documents, and the flyer. Jolene submitted a supplementary affidavit verifying the documents were fraudulent. 2 days later, I got a call from the sheriff's department. Mr. Dorsey, the officer said, we've received multiple complaints about the Cedar Ridge HOA engaging in unlawful activity. We'd like you to come down and give a statement. When I showed up, I wasn't alone. The Thompsons were already there. So was Marty. And so was a city zoning official who had just realized that her signature had been forged on Lenora's proposal. It took less than a week for the sheriff's office to execute a search warrant on Lenora's home. According to the report, they found HOA documents stored in a locked cabinet in her garage, dozens of them, and signed, pre-filled with different residents' names. They also found a USB drive with scanned images of neighborhood maps, all showing adjusted property lines. Many of them overlapped with parcels owned by residents who'd refused to attend Lenora's private meetings. The HOA board went into full meltdown mode. 2 members resigned immediately. 1 lawyered up. Lenora, however, did what she always did when cornered. She doubled down. She called an emergency HOA meeting at the community center. I showed up early. So did half the neighborhood. She marched to the podium in a tailored navy suit and tried to spin it as a miscommunication. There's been some confusion regarding the Community Enhancement Initiative, she said, flipping through a binder. Certain individuals have misrepresented the intentions of this board. I raised my hand. Quintin, this isn't a Q&A. The sheriff's department just filed charges against you. I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Forgery. Attempted land theft. Filing false municipal documents. You want to talk about misrepresentation, Lenora? Let's start there. The room fell silent. Then murmurs. Marty stood up. I gave a sworn statement. So did the Thompsons. The city knows everything. Another neighbor followed. Then another. It was like dam bursting. 15 minutes later, Lenora stormed out of the meeting, leaving her binder behind. I picked it up and handed it to the city clerk who'd come to observe. She snapped it shut and said, "This is going to the DA." That night, I walked back to the field. The hay had been baled. The Lexus was gone, towed away 2 days earlier by a very grumpy man who refused to answer any questions. I stood there for a long minute, breathing in the clean, sweet scent of cut grass. Then I went inside and opened a new file on my laptop titled Cedar Ridge Homeowners Legal Reform Committee. By the end of the week, the Cedar Ridge HOA board had dissolved faster than a sugar cube in rainwater. Without Lenora at the helm and with 2 board members under investigation, no one was left to steer the ship. The remaining residents, already fed up with the mess, voted to suspend all HOA operations pending a full legal review. But things didn't stop unraveling there. 3 days after the city clerk took Lenora's binder, the district attorney's office issued a press release. A formal investigation had been launched into multiple counts of municipal fraud, forgery, and unlawful attempts to appropriate private land. Attached to the case were not just the zoning documents and fake signatures, but financial records that linked HOA dues to consulting fees paid to a nonprofit Lenora had registered in her own name 6 months prior. Jolene called me that afternoon. She created a shell foundation, she said. Filed it under Cedar Ridge Community Wellness Initiative. Looks like she funneled nearly $30,000 from the HOA account into it. I leaned against the kitchen counter, listening. She listed expenses like land survey analysis, infrastructure visioning, and executive stipends. All vague. All fake. The city's auditing department flagged the account after we submitted the binder. They've frozen her assets. Is she in jail? Not yet. But they're building a strong enough case to push for indictments. She's lured up with a guy who used to defend crooked developers downtown. They're not even denying the shell foundation, just trying to claim it was for beautification. I stared out the window at the back acre, golden and quiet. Jolene, I said, you think this goes deeper? She paused. There's talk she planned to sell access rights to a development firm. Something about a nature trail merging with a future luxury subdivision. If that's true, they'll be digging for more than signatures. The next day, a plain white sedan with county tags rolled down my driveway. A man in a tan blazer stepped out, introduced himself as Detective Lowell from the Property Crimes Division, and asked if I had time to speak. We sat on the porch. He didn't take notes at first, just listened. We've seen this kind of thing before, he said. HOAs get too much unchecked power, and someone sees an opportunity. Lenora was smart enough to keep things quiet, but not smart enough to cover her tracks. She ever done this before? Not that we know of. But she's been on the board of 3 other neighborhood associations in the last 15 years. We're reviewing financial activity in all of them now. I handed him a flash drive with everything I had: footage, documents, emails from concerned neighbors. He slid it into his jacket pocket and nodded. You've been thorough, he said. We appreciate that. You might be called in as a witness when this goes to trial.
I didn't ask when.
I already knew it was coming. That weekend, a town hall was held at the city library. Not an HOA meeting, an open community forum. The mayor showed up, along with a council member who specialized in land use policy. For the first time in years, Cedar Ridge residents were allowed to speak without being gavelled into silence. I wasn't planning to say anything, but when the floor opened and half a dozen neighbors shared how they'd been pressured, misled, or outright lied to by Lenora and her cronies, I stood up. "My name's Quintin Dorsey," I said. "Most of you know me. I farm hay on my family's land. A few weeks ago, I found a car parked in the middle of my field with a sign claiming the HOA had annexed it. That was the start of all this." A few people chuckled. The mayor didn't. What followed was a campaign of intimidation, forged documents, and an attempt to rezone property that never belonged to the HOA. If a few of us hadn't fought back, we'd be looking at a paved walking trail right now running through our backyards. I handed the microphone back and sat down. After the meeting, the councilwoman approached me with a clipboard and a proposal. "We're drafting a municipal ordinance," she said, "to cap the authority of HOAs in unincorporated areas. We're calling it the Dorsey provision." I blinked. "You're naming it after me?" She smiled. "You held the line." By mid-month, the ordinance passed. It required all HOAs to submit financial disclosures to the city annually, banned private rezoning efforts without full resident approval, and stripped HOAs of enforcement power over any property not explicitly signed into the association. It was a seismic change. And it wasn't just for Cedar Ridge. Neighboring communities adopted similar policies within weeks. Lenora, meanwhile, was charged with 6 felony counts. The trial was set for the spring. Her attorney tried to spin her actions as misguided civic ambition, but the paper trail said otherwise. So did a witness statement from her own treasurer, who turned over a second ledger, one Lenora kept locked in her desk drawer, recording off the book's transactions. One entry read, "Private consultation with R. Baskin future easement access through Dorsey, lot $1,500. The name Baskin belonged to a developer whose permit applications had been denied 3 times for trying to build a gated enclave just north of the ridge. Now he was under investigation too. The fallout was swift. Residents who'd once championed the HOA began organizing a new neighborhood committee this time, one without dues, penalties, or secret meetings. They asked me to chair it. I said no. Instead, I offered to host monthly potlucks in the Hayfield. The first one drew nearly 40 people. Kids ran between hay bales, adults brought folding chairs and home-cooked casseroles, and someone set up a speaker playing old country tunes. Nobody talked about fines or property lines. We just existed, together, without rules dictating how. As the sun dipped behind the trees, Marty wandered over with a paper plate and a grin. "You ever think that stubborn streak of yours would change a whole community?" I shrugged. Didn't set out to. Just didn't like being told where my land ended by someone who never set foot in a field. He laughed. "Well, you sure baled more than hay this time." I didn't correct him. There wasn't anything else that needed saying. The Lexus never came back. The hayfield stayed open. And the HOA? Just a memory, buried beneath a pile of canceled permits and shredded bylaws. By February, the frost had settled in thick over the ridge, and with the fields too stiff for cutting, I spent most mornings working on the old barn, replacing warped beams and oiling the hinges that had started to groan like old men in church pews. It was peaceful again, no clipboard patrols, no passive-aggressive flyers, no surprise condemnations. But if I thought the storm had passed, I underestimated just how long dirty hands leave stains. One afternoon, I was fitting new planks along the western wall when a county vehicle pulled up the drive. A woman in a dark wool coat stepped out, holding a folder under one arm. She introduced herself as ADA Melinda Kwan, part of the team handling Lenora's case. "I wanted to speak with you privately," she said. "We've uncovered something new, and I believe you should be the first to hear it. We stepped inside the barn, where the wind couldn't reach. She opened the folder and laid out a series of financial statements, receipts, and a notarized letter from a former HOA accountant, someone named Wilkins, who had vanished from the neighborhood over a year ago without explanation. Wilkins gave a deposition last week, she said. Said he was pressured to cook the books. When he refused, Lenora threatened to report him for tax fraud. He left town the next day. I stared at the figures. The numbers weren't just off, they were impossible. Dues collected from non-existent properties. Landscaping fees charged during months when no work had been done. One line item stood out. Emergency security installation. I read out loud.
$11,000.
Never installed, she said. That invoice was fabricated. The money went directly to a private account in Tennessee. Belongs to a man named Roy Baskin. I didn't need the name explained. I remembered it clearly from the zoning document entry. What's the connection? I asked. He's her cousin. Posed as a contractor. Set up a fake LLC. The two of them filed paperwork to buy undeveloped land adjacent to Cedar Ridge. The plan was to rezone the area using HOA leverage, then sell it back to the city as a greenway at triple the original price. So this goes beyond us. She nodded. They tried a similar scheme in 3 other counties. All fell apart before completion. Yours is the only community where the paper trail is fully intact. I folded my arms. What do you need from me? Testimony. Not just about the forged documents, but the intimidation tactics, the false condemnation, the misuse of HOA authority. We're preparing a RICO case. I blinked. Organized crime? This wasn't just one rogue HOA president. This was a coordinated effort to defraud both residents and the city. If we can prove systemic abuse of power and financial conspiracy, it sets a precedent. I agreed. Not out of pride, but because it felt like the only way to be sure none of this happened again. The grand jury convened in March. I wasn't the only one called. Marty, the Thompsons, even the zoning clerk whose signature had been forged, all of us testified under oath. The courtroom was stark, quiet, and colder than I expected. Lenora sat at the defense table in a gray suit, her hair pulled back tight. She didn't look at me once. ADA Quan guided me through each piece of evidence. The fake annexation vote, the manipulated maps, the bogus safety complaints. When she asked how it had affected me personally, I told the truth. I stopped trusting my neighbors, I said. And I started wondering if the rules we live by mean anything when someone like her can twist them to fit whatever she wants. The judge didn't react, but I caught the bailiff nodding slightly. The trial stretched through spring. Every week brought new revelations. A second HOA board member admitted to shredding resident ballots. Another confessed to accepting kickbacks from Baskin's company in exchange for pushing zoning changes. One of the city clerks, someone I didn't recognize, was placed on administrative leave after it was revealed she'd fast-tracked Lenora's fraudulent proposals in exchange for what was described as a campaign donation. By the time the prosecution rested, the courtroom felt like a confessional booth that had sprouted walls and a jury box. Lenora's lawyer tried to claim she was a scapegoat, that she'd been misled by others, that her only crime was overzealous community engagement.
But the jury didn't buy it.
On the second day of deliberations, they returned a unanimous verdict, guilty on all counts. The judge, a silver-haired man with a voice like gravel, didn't hesitate. For the crimes of conspiracy to commit fraud, document forgery, financial misappropriation, and unlawful land procurement, this court sentences Lenora Featherstone to 15 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole after 10. She didn't cry.
She didn't speak.
Just stared ahead like she was still waiting for someone to hand her a microphone and a binder. Roy Baskin was arrested 2 days later in Knoxville. Extradited.
Charged.
Denied bail. The fallout hit fast. Cedar Ridge's charter was officially dissolved by city order. Any remaining HOA funds were returned proportionally to the residents, minus legal fees. Those who had been fined or sanctioned under Lenora's regime were issued formal apologies and compensation where applicable. In place of the HOA, a new civic liaison group was formed, not a governing body, just a communication channel between the neighborhood and the city. It was chaired by a high school teacher named Marisol, who brought brownies to the first meeting and refused to allow any titles beyond volunteer. I declined a position again. Not because I didn't care, but because I'd already done what I came to do. One warm afternoon in June, I got a letter from the DA's office. Inside was a certificate of commendation for extraordinary assistance in the exposure and dismantling of systemic fraud. I stuck it on the fridge next to a flyer for a local bluegrass concert and a picture of my nephew holding a catfish. That weekend, we held another potluck in the Hayfield. Bigger this time. Someone rigged string lights between the oak posts. A few folks brought guitars. Kids ran barefoot through the grass, while their parents laughed over plates of brisket and cornbread. Toward the end of the evening, Marisol stood on a folding chair and raised a mason jar. "To clear skies," she said. "To neighbors who don't sneak around with measuring tape. And to Quintin, who proved you don't need a gavel to lay down the law." I raised my own glass, a little embarrassed but proud all the same. Later, as dusk fell and folks began to pack up, Marty wandered over with a half-empty tray of deviled eggs. "Funny thing," he said, "I heard that same developer tried to buy property over in Maple Creek." Got laughed out of the room. "Good," I said. "Let him pave his own backyard." We both looked out over the field, where the last lanterns flickered and the grass swayed low in the breeze. It wasn't just a victory. It was a reminder that no matter how polished the lies, no matter how official the signature, the truth still held weight, and when ordinary people stood their ground, even the deepest roots of corruption could get pulled clean from the soil.